Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and I'll tell you what, there's something about trees, which if you're listening to the podcast, you obviously agree with me, but there's definitely something about how they make you feel. And for me, like I see lots of trees, as I was mentioning, lots and lots of podcasts. I love driving around, love the observation I make when I stare at trees in paddocks or in parks or wherever. There's something about Norfolk pine that when I look at that and I hear the surf, I just think, God, how many years has that just added to my life? It just makes me feel so calm, so at peace, and hearing the wind rustle through them, it's amazing. Anyway, let's spend this episode of the podcast talking about hitting the reset button on a few different pine species through the process of candle cutting. It's a technique that I use a lot for let's call them single flush pines. Let's put a few trees in that category: the Scots pine, the Mugo, and I'm also going to put the radiata in there, even though maybe they're a bit more continual flush. They never seem to really stop than the previous two that I mentioned. But it excludes things that I'm going to talk about today. It definitely excludes white pines, even though they're in that single flush category, and it excludes black pines. So if you just focus in on just those simple three, Scots, Mugos, radiatas, then that's what I'm going to be talking about for this podcast. And it's a technique that I love that allows me to develop budding further back in. Most pines, when they grow, they push a one-to-one scenario. So one bud continues to grow to become one really long bud. And then you might find that it starts to get a whirl of a set of branches all coming from the same spot where that bud originated from. Not always guaranteed, but most likely, and it's a bit ugly, the growth. So you get a really long shoot in the middle, and then you get this ring of branches that come out from one spot. The process of candle cutting is, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but it's a technique that I love, that I can use, that a lot of people can use, that everyone really should be using if your trees are nice and happy and healthy, to allow you to develop better ramification or fine ramification on your pines. When we decandle a black pine, then it's a completely different process. So decandling and candle cutting, I'll go over it a bit more, so don't worry, it's a bit grey and muddy at the moment, but when we decandle a black pine, we are able to manipulate needle length on the trees. When we candle cut, we can sort of do the same thing, but not really. It doesn't have as much control over needle length. So when I am factoring into the size or styling of trees of the varieties, Scots, Mugo, and radiatas, I'm factoring in a look at the genetics of the tree. What naturally is the length of needle on this tree? And there are different needle lengths on all those different varieties. There's sub-varieties of all the different trees. And some naturally have smaller needles, some naturally have larger needles. Some are a bit droopier, some are a bit straighter and thicker. Whatever it is, I always factor that in. So when I'm looking and talking about candle cutting, I'm not specifically focusing in on how do I reduce needle length on these trees, because needle length reduction on these single flush varieties, broadly categorized single flush variety, it's often done using techniques which I don't subscribe to. I don't like for looking at a tree that naturally has quite long needles and then it's been starved and maybe not fed, maybe not repotted when it should have been, maybe had water held back from, just to keep those needles nice and short. I would never, ever sacrifice the health of any tree for me wanting to reduce its genetics, to change the way that it's grown. We don't bind feet anymore to keep them small, so I don't follow that approach when it comes to needles on pine. So now that I've got that disclaimer out of the way, I want to spend the next little bit just having a chat to you about candle cutting and why I use it and timing and technique and all that sort of stuff. So let's get into it. Righto, candle cutting. Candle cutting is, I'll talk about the process first. Candle cutting is where you take the new spring candle, which is clearly identified because it's nice and green. You should see the stem of the new candle being nice and green. The old growth behind it, where that new spring candle has grown from, should be brown. Because it's a bit older, that wood, so it should have gone brown. So the new spring candle, there'll be a little bit of a stem on it. Then you'll get into the new needles, and then there'll be lots of new needles starting to stick out, and then there'll be a bud at the tip of it. So the candle cutting process is to take your scissors and go into that new spring candle and leave a certain amount of new needles and cut through that stem. So you're removing the bud that's there. So therefore, the new shoot that's grown has only got new stem, new needles, and that's it. And it puts a tree into a state where it must produce new buds for that branch or that particular area to continue to grow. And that's exactly what we want. We are working out our division point where the new buds are going to start to grow from. So the length of the candle that we leave, if you cut it right at the very tip, like I'll just use some mathematics, some examples, right? So let's say the bud is, the new spring candle, is 10 centimeters long, and you come and cut it at 9 centimeters. The new buds generally form at the point of the cut. So that means that your next division point for that branch is going to be at 9 centimeters long. Now, if you're working with, let's say, a primary branch, that might be perfect. If it's a secondary branch, you might say, well, I don't really want it to be 9 centimeters, so I'm going to cut it to, say, 5 centimeters, right? So the point for the division on your secondary branches will be 5 centimeters. But then if you're at the point where you're going, well, I'm ramifying, I want stuff as close and tight and dense as I possibly can. I don't need extension. If I cut it at 9 centimeters, then that's going to blow out the internode length or the distance between the branch sets is going to start to blow out. So therefore, if you're at the point where you're ramifying, it might be that you come in and you only cut past 2 or 3 pairs of the new needles that are formed. And that's where I'm at with a lot of my trees, my radios, where I'm doing that really short cut now on a lot of trees that I come across, because this is a refinement technique where you're taking a tree from whatever point it's at now to making it far more ramified and developed and structured. You don't want long growth. If you cut it at 9 centimeters and it looks nice, like let's say the silhouette at 9 centimeters on that spring candle looks perfect. Like you can go, that's great. That's the Instagram moment. Take the photo. That's great. When it grows next, the silhouette's going to be destroyed. It's going to be too long. And ultimately, next year when you come back to do this, or when you work on the tree in autumn, winter next year, you are going to be removing that branch because it's going to be too long. It's going to be sticking out beyond the silhouette, and you'll go, well, now I need to cut it back. So my recommendation always is, when you're ramifying, pick your perfect silhouette and cut in closer than that. And then when it grows again, it'll grow out to the perfect silhouette that you want. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, and this is that whole thought process, the plan for your bonsai is to always make sure you know what you want to achieve before you just start cutting at things, before you start removing things, before you start, making life harder for the tree and for yourself somewhere down the track. So think about what it is you're trying to achieve, and then the length of the internode that you're trying to achieve, cut past that. Do not cut it so it's just the stem left. You need to make sure that when you are candle cutting, you leave some of the new needles there as well. I would never go back to one pair of needles or one set of needles, depending on the tree. I would always leave, maybe 2, 3, 4 as a minimum, and then start increasing from that based on what you're trying to achieve, based on the internode length that you'd like to have with your tree. Now, it's not always guaranteed that this is going to work. It's a best case scenario, and that's where you've got to make sure, as I said in the intro, you've got to make sure your tree is healthy and strong before you do any of this stuff, any of it. You can't flog your tree by removing all that spring growth on a weak tree and expect it to bounce back and take steps forward. You do this sort of a process on a weak tree, you are definitely going to send it backwards, and you're going to start killing things on the tree, and may even push it over the edge. Anyway, so Before I go too far, I've got a note here saying refer YouTube channel. I've got a video on this on radiators getting its candles cut, so you can have a look at the technique there and see a visual link for it. So Bonsai Matsu YouTube, have a look there. So moving on, the process pretty easy, pretty simple. When you decide to do it, make sure that the needles have pushed out. So I do it about now. Timing wise, now's pretty much a good time, but in my collection, I've got a range of different trees that I'm going to do this on, and the buds, the growth, the needle length that's come from that new spring growth is different on every single tree that I've got. So for me, I wait until there's needle length there before I come in and do a cut. So if I've just got a bud that's pushing, but the needle hasn't opened, or maybe it's just open, it's only maybe 5 mil long, something like that, I won't do the candle cutting process on those buds. I'll put that tree aside and I'll wait. Other trees that are pushed out, and maybe the needles are starting to get to the maybe 2 centimeter, 1.5, 2 centimeter, 3 centimeter, something like that. Perfect candidates for doing candle cutting on those trees. So even though I've chosen now as my time, roughly my time, I won't do it unless it's appropriate for the individual tree. You're better off just waiting a little bit longer. And the reason why I choose now, which is the most important part, is this growing period that we have for our trees. Based on where I am in Melbourne, Australia, this, for me, in my environment, in my yard, and it's going to be different for everybody listening to this, so you need to make the assessment and do the study. Once you've done it, did it work well? Did it create juvenile growth? Was it done too late? Was it done too early? Did you end up with really long needles and really long internodes? Did it come out the way that you expected? And if it didn't, which is how I learned that this is the perfect timing for me, I would adjust things. So just to quantify this, we're at the end of the second month of spring. So calendar-wise, there's about another month to go in the spring period. And it means that there's still quite a period of time left for growing. The reason why we do it now is, and you don't do it earlier than this, because if you do it earlier than this, you end up with really long growth, really, really super long growth. If you do it later than this, I've found that the tree goes into a panic mode because it's getting too hot with the summer period, and it also means that the buds aren't going to grow quite as strong as what they should. So you end up with a lot of juvenile growth, or even maybe growth the needles are way too short for the tree when they start to come out. And depending on the variety of tree, the response is different. So, for instance, a Scots pine, when you do this candle cutting, more often than not, there's always exceptions to things, right? So more often than not, I find that when I candle cut, it produces a bud at the site of the cut, and maybe one or two others around the place as well, that grow next spring. They're not. I don't expect them to grow now, so I don't candle cut and then expect I'm going to get a second flush of growth, because they're in that single flush period or category of pines. Radiata pines, Monterey pines, depending on where you are slightly different, because they're almost continual growth. So when I candle cut on a radiata, I expect to see the bud come along, and then before it gets to the dormancy period next winter or thereabouts, I would expect those buds to start opening and start thickening. All right, and that's where the trees are slightly different. Just like when we decandle a black pine, I expect buds to appear, buds to grow, needles to open, and start to form on the tree. So expectations of what's going to happen next is very different between the different varieties, but the overall aim or the focus or the purpose of doing the candle cutting or decandling remains the same. You're trying to get internodes, trying to get division, and sometimes shorter needles, whatever. But I don't want to get bogged down on that. So it's all based on the growing period remaining that we've got. Now, just as a fun fact for why we do candle cutting now, but for me, decandling is maybe another 5-6 weeks away. How I get my head around this is when we candle cut, I'm forcing the tree to back bud. I'm forcing it to say, right, there's no viable bud for next year now, or for continuing to grow. If I don't do something, then I'm going to have an issue. So the tree then goes into a state where it has to grow a bud, which musters a lot of strength up, and it's hard to say, okay, in that area there, please produce a bud. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. It'll take me a while, but I'll get there. When we decandle in another 5 weeks or so, 5 or 6 weeks' time, whatever it is, somewhere in the future, in early summer, the buds are already there. The buds are at the base of the black pine candle, and when we remove them, they just get activated. All right, so it's a different process, so therefore there's got to be different timing. Doing them all at the same time, expecting the same result, is going to cause issues. And do you know how I know? Because I've been there, I've done that. I've candle cut at the same time that I've decandled, which was way too late, and destroyed trees and lost branches and had all sorts of a nightmare about it. So again, the purpose of this podcast is to hopefully knuckle things down a little bit so you avoid any pain and heartache that I've had to go through, and your trees can get where they've got to get to a little bit faster. So what to expect, as I said, you're going to get budding around the site of the cut for these trees. That's what I would normally expect. Will there be other budding further down the tree? Possibly, yes, maybe. Depending on the tree, most likely. But I don't bank on that sort of stuff. It's that whole bud conveyor thing that when you start removing these candles, you're letting light and air into those inner areas, which then may, just as a purpose of being opened up a little bit more, a bit more sunlight and air getting in there, it might pop those buds and say, hey, look, here you go. This is your chance. There's been a bit of an issue around the tips, so now you can start to go. So that's a nice side benefit, but I definitely don't do this process with the thought that I'm going to get back budding. If I want that budding further back on the branches, you may find that by not candle cutting and feeding the trees and maybe pulling a few branches down with guy wires or pruning selectively or whatever it is, you may stimulate those buds further back in on the branches. So don't rely on this candle cutting to force that back budding. Okay, so if candle cut, buds start to appear somewhere in the future. Maybe it might be a month, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 6 weeks, maybe it's 8 weeks, whatever it is. You'll hopefully start seeing these, not hopefully, but you should definitely start seeing these buds start to appear. What to do next? Leave it alone. Do not touch it. The bud might look enormous. It might be a beast. It might start pushing and you go, bloody hell, that thing's way too strong. Just leave it alone. Don't touch it. You've done enough to the tree. Just let it catch its breath, let it move on, let it recover, and don't do anything with these trees. I don't care if there's, 10 buds coming from the one spot and, half a dozen are really super strong and the tree's growing like crazy. What's happening is the tree has allocated resources to that area, right? And it said, for whatever reason, super strong, lots of sunlight, whatever, just go like crazy. Run as much as you can. Perfect. So that gets out of control, gets too thick, gets too coarse, too long, too thick, too coarse, the rule, get rid of it. So we will, somewhere in the future, we'll get rid of it. But rather than that rampant supply of nutrients to that area being distributed elsewhere on the tree, so the whole tree suddenly goes crazy, we'll just let the tree pinpoint that area and say, yep, okay, put all your resources or majority of resources there, but the rest of the buds around the tree, let's just grow them really calmly and let them develop nicely and start to do what they're going to do. Let them start to get medium-sized buds and small-sized buds and a few larger ones here and there. Let the needles start to come out and let that rampant area just go berserk. Because then what you'll find is you'll have nice, even, consistent growth around the other areas of the tree, but that strong area that we're going to cut off when it comes time for the growth to stop as it heads towards dormancy, let that go crazy. We'll cut that off. We'll remove it, and we'll fix the structure of the tree. But let the rest of it be nice and calm. If you cut it off, or if you remove these larger buds, or where there's multiple buds coming from the one area, let's say you look at this area where there's 10 buds, and you go, well, I don't want 10, I want 2. I want division. That's what we want, 1 to 2. If you go through and remove the other 8 buds that are there, the resources that were going to go to those 8 buds suddenly all go to the 2 to the left, and then they get super strong. You leave all 10 there, 2 or 3 might die naturally by themselves anyway. So the 2 that you might have left may have been flagged for termination by the tree as a result anyway. But if you leave them all there, the tree checks and balances its allocation of resources. This one gets too big, that one stays too small, this one stays just right. All right, so once it's all calmed down, then we go and we cut off the 2 bigs, we cut off the 2 smalls, we keep the just rights, and Goldilocks is happy. Everything's perfect. We just keep flowing along with the design of the tree. So with the allocation of resources, just leave it alone. Let the tree do what it's going to do. You've gone in there, you've been tough with it. Now just leave it alone. So that brings me along to my next point, which is what to do about fertilizing. I'll talk about decandling. Decandling is, it's really clear. It's really obvious. You get rid of the fertilizer. Don't add nitrogen to the tree once you're trying to activate these dormant buds. But this is a different process. We're not activating the dormant buds. We're actually looking to force the tree to bud again in areas that it wasn't expecting to. We cut, with 6 pairs of needles. Was a bud in that point already? Was the tree going to push a bud in that area? Don't know. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But we're asking the tree to do it. So we're giving it slightly longer period of time. What should we do with fertilizing? Now, for me, as a general rule, you'll know that if you listen to the podcast, you'll know sometimes I speak in very general terms. That's because there's never one specific answer to anything. But as a general rule, if I look at my tree and I say, you know what, you are super healthy, you are super strong, you're looking fantastic, I love you, baby, I'm going to cut you back, well then I won't give you fertilizer. Because I'll hold back, I'll let the tree, just allocate the resources it's got. I've fed it really well up to this point. I know what I've done. I know I've boosted the tree's resources. I can see that from the way the candles have grown. Everything's looking fantastic on this tree. Okay, so you're not going to get fertilizer. So let's flip the scenario around. We're going to look at it and say, okay, we've got a tree now, maybe doesn't look quite so good. Should I fertilize it after candle cutting? That's the wrong question. The question is, should you be candle cutting in the first place? If you're looking at that tree and you're thinking before you go through the process of candle cutting, if you're going to get into this automatic mode and say, oh, it's candle cutting time, I heard it on the podcast, Scott said to do this, and you haven't done the health assessment, then one, you're mad. Secondly, your results are going to be hit and miss, and fertilizing may or may not fix the problem. So I would be asking yourself, if you have an inkling that you need to fertilize that tree post candle cutting, ask yourself the hard question: should I candle cut this at this time of the year, or should I just leave this thing alone? Maybe it's buds have pushed out and they're tiny. Maybe the needles are coming out. There's no stem on it, and maybe the whole candle itself might only be a centimetre long. Really, should you be candle cutting something like that, or should you just leave it alone? Is the tree trying to tell you that, hey, something's happened? Maybe, I was repotted late. Maybe the repotting post-care wasn't right. Maybe I'm just in a weakened state. Whatever it is, the tree's trying to tell you a story, and it's up to you to read that story and interpret it and say, well, the best thing for the tree, I don't care about ramifying the tree 1 year ahead of where it normally would be. The tree's telling you that, hey, just leave me alone. Just, keep feeding me, let me go. Please don't do anything harsh with me, because if you do, there's a good chance I'm going to die, or I'm not going to respond the way that you want me to. So, with fertilizing, as a very general rule, I'll say, hey, look, I'm not going to be fertilizing after candle cutting. If I look at it and think, there's a mid-health, there's some longer stuff, there's some medium stuff, there's not too much short stuff, I'm still going to do the candle cutting process, but the tree's a bit inconsistent with its growth, yeah, then I might put a tea bag on there or two. I might do something like that just to sort of give it a bit of a nudge along. It's at the point where I'm looking at it going, yeah, there's candles on here which are 10 centimeters long. There's some that are 5 centimeters. It's a bit all over the shop. Yep, okay, I'm gonna put some fertilizer on that. So there might be exceptions to the rule where I'll do it, but as a general rule, when I look at the trees, I'll be thinking about the health of the tree before I get into that point. All right, so I'm just going to jump back to the timing side of things, and I'm going to talk about our lower, weaker branches as well. When you candle cut too early, think about it like this: you're going to end up with really long growth, really long needles. When it's done too late, you're going to potentially get no buds because it's too late for the tree. The tree doesn't have enough time to generate the buds that it needs, or you may end up with juvenile growth, or it may set the tree back a long way. So for me, I had to go through a lot of process, which I've talked about before, of that metronome, that bouncing backwards and forwards. All right, so let's do it too early. What's the result on that tree? Let's do it too late. What's the result? All right, so let's do it a little bit. Go to the other side. I'm going to do it earlier, but maybe just a bit later than what I did last time. All right, so then I'll go to the other side and go, okay, so I did it too late last time. I'm going to come back a couple of weeks. And for years, I bounced and bounced and bounced to the point that I went, there's got to be, I was always confident that there would be a way that we could work with these pines, that I could work with these pines, and I could get the timing right based on my location and my climate and my yard and blah, 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 all the usual stuff that goes with it. But I was really confident that once you start seeing the results of something, that you can fine tune it, that you can base it on time and start working with it. So too early, it's long and your growth's out of control. Too late and it's juvenile, or there's no buds. So look back at if you have done this before and it hasn't worked for you, please don't throw your hands in the air and go, it just doesn't work. It's all crap. It's rubbish. I'm not going to do it. Look at it and go, well, okay, when did you do it? And this is why I love taking photos. Like, I've got too many trees to catalogue them and use the systems to monitor and measure them. But I know that when I look through my photos on my phone, I can go, well, when did I do it? And it's date stamped. So I can look at it and go, well, I did that in such and such, and the growth was terrible. All right, so I'm going to do it a bit earlier than that. All right, so I did it this time and it was too long. I'm going to do it a little bit later. So there's always if you take a photo, sooner or later you can get through it and start working with it. But when it's done just right, the needles are perfect. Like, they're nice and straight. They're not all twisted. And this comes from the health of the tree too, also, and genetics of the tree, and. But when you get it right, you end up with really nice budding. You end up with shorter length on the stem, and the needles are a lot closer. You end up with it all looking just right and looking just nice. And, I think back to when I got told a long, long time ago that, radiators are rubbish. They're too hard to manage. No one knows how to look after them. And, other people would have worked this out by now, if it, whatever. But I look at good radiators now, and there's a lot more starting to pop up around the bonsai community, which is brilliant because their bark is amazing. And when you get the technique and the methodology for how to look after them, the needles look fantastic. When you get the timing right for your trees, they are seriously one of the best trees, by far the best. And, I can't tell you how many Scots pines I've seen where I go through this process, and the development and structure and the fullness and just the perfection that they start to achieve is really, really, it's fantastic. And I don't expect, on a Scots pine or a Mugo, I don't expect a needle change in length or anything about the characteristics of the needle. Radiators, I really don't expect it either. So I work. I think you've got to work with what the tree's got to present, and then magnify it. Make it the beautiful part of the tree. My big radiata that I love to death. It seriously makes me so happy. It makes me smile every single day. When I look at that, I think, you are the perfect size. You are in perfect proportion. Your bark is just getting better by the second. Like, there's so much to love about these things, and getting this candle cutting technique right is just brilliant. And then, like, I've found that maybe there's other ways to do it. There's always a different way to work on bonsai, and all I can talk about is what I've done and what works for me, and hopefully make your bonsai journey a little bit easier and rewarding as all hell, because I've found that this is a great way to manage growth on perfect bonsai species. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I talked about it a long time ago, back when I was in Japan, about these Montereys, these radiatas, and possibly grafting, things like white pine onto them and black pines, and using the characteristics of their magnificent bark that they've got and how they form it so quickly and get the fishes and really take on that gnarly look, to say, let's keep that, but let's change the foliage to be a better foliage. But I think for me, the foliage on a radiata is perfect. When it's managed, when it's looked after, they're an iconic tree that can be, without doubt, I believe they're one of the prime pine species available anywhere. As far as I know, they tend to grow in all sorts of environments. I've seen them all around the country. But you go to a forestry somewhere, a park, and you see these things that have sown. You walk down the street where they're growing, and they shoot up from bloody everywhere. So they're an amazing tree that's readily available. They grow so fast. Get movement into them nice and young. Start developing a plan, and then use these techniques, this candle cutting technique, to make sure that you can take it to the next step. So I'm just going to wrap up with this section before we get into the finale of the podcast by saying that you've got to do your health assessment. Most important thing is make sure your tree can take a step forward, not a step back, but a step forward. Know what to expect, like know how this thing's going to react, and don't try and make the tree something that it's not. All right? You're not going to turn a radiata into a black pine, and you shouldn't. They're perfect the way they are. I mean, that smell they've got, oh my God, they're amazing. But working with what's in front of you, making sure your tree is super strong and super healthy with this big push that we have with feeding early in the spring period. And then as it gets towards this latter part of spring, we can start doing techniques like this with the trees, the single flush or radiata pines. We can start doing techniques with them to take them to the next level and be guaranteed is a strong word, but almost guaranteed or reassured that they're going to take that step forward in the majority of cases. And the asterisk to this whole conversation is you might do this and it doesn't bud from that point. I've found that when you start multiplying these branches out anyway, it doesn't matter if one you cut and it doesn't bud. That's 1 out of 50. Doesn't matter. You've taken 50 branches. Go to 1 to 2. You've got 100 branches in that area. You're not going to miss 1 or 2 that don't do it. But in the very vast majority of circumstances, this technique of candle cutting is just brilliant. But like I said, if you want a visual representation, have a look. I think there might even be one on a Scots pine that I've done in there as well. But this process is not new. It's not hidden. I didn't invent it. It's just something that I use that works really, really well for taking these species to the next level. Well, I hope you found that interesting and enjoyable. It's like I said, I try and keep the podcast so it's relevant to now, and this is definitely something which is on the radar. It's something I've been doing with customers and people recently, and it's definitely something which is going to run over the next little period of time too. Just get your head around it. That doesn't have to happen now. So listen to this podcast when it first comes out. Don't take a sick day from work and go home and start your candle cutting. You've got time. You've got time around it to do it, but it's generally about this period of time. That start of the last month of spring is generally when I start looking at doing all this with these single flush and multi flush pines. So the results. I'm just going to recap on this. So the radiatas, you'll get to regrow buds, and they'll continue to grow these buds with foliage. So the needles will start to push out. Your Scots, Mugos, that may happen as well, but generally you'll find that it'll just generate buds that'll stay there until next spring. Like what happens with a spruce, you cut into the new growth, you get the buds don't grow until the following year. So doing it too late might mean that you miss that period, but that's what to expect. White pines, if you do this technique with white pines, you may well kill your white pine. Okay, I can't be any firmer than that with it. Do not do candle cutting or decandling with a white pine. You may get away with it. You might hear of stories where people have got away with it, but long term, it's definitely going to be setting back your white pine. White pine are a whole nother species that this doesn't apply to. So don't simply think about candle cutting applying to every single flush pine. Do your research. Have a look at it. So, yeah. Just be really careful. And I'll say that because I've seen it happen and I've seen the results, and it's not pretty with these trees. You've only got 2 years thereabouts with needles on pines for them to do something, and then those needles drop off. Once the needles are gone on a tree, that's it. It's all over. It's all done. Anyway, thanks for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it. Reach out if you've got any questions on candle cutting. It's a simple, easy process to do. You can do a bit of a thin out and a bit of a needle pluck as well while you're going. Get rid of the stuff underneath the branches so it looks nice and clean and fresh. You can wire as well, but my preference is, unless I can get my hands in there nice and easy, just focus on the job at hand at the moment, which is to really start to get some division, or going from a 1-to-1 scenario to a 1-to-2, cutting that bud that's extending, trying to get budding further back on the tree, and really start to get things to fill out a little bit more, and watch the length of the candle that you're cutting, because that's determining your internode length too. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening in. Love the support that I get for this podcast. I love the impact that it has on so many people around the world for bonsai, and I'm so grateful to be part of your bonsai journey, and thank you for the kind words. It means a hell of a lot to me. And thank you to subscribers to the podcast too. You are the lifeblood of this thing, and if you're not a subscriber, then please thank the subscribers, because they're what keep this thing rolling. Anyway, thanks for listening in. As always, until next time, happy bonsai.